just in the shower and realized that there was like a lump, like a teeny tiny, like a bump in my right breast, and just immediately thought that doesn't feel normal. It's not how my body should feel. The next morning I called my GP and just asked for an appointment. They kind of understood quite quickly that I was really concerned. I was able to see my GP, I believe it was like a day or two later. It was very, very quick turnaround. Then as I went from kind of blood tests into physical scans, I had an ultrasound. On the ultrasound, the consultant saw something. Her demeanor, her body language, her face just dropped.
Hello and welcome to the Thrive Against Cancer podcast, where we give a voice to the cancer community. My name is Toby Freeman, founder and CEO of the Robin Cancer Trust, cancer advocate and your host. Every episode, we will be hosting open and honest conversations with people affected by cancer, whether personally, as a family member, clinician, or charities and organisations. We will be talking to the cancer community about the cancer community and all the things that are important to you. Our guest today is a young black woman who has survived cancer. She is a patient advocate for Breast Cancer Now and an ambassador for Black Women Rising, valuing community and representation and striving to make the world a better place for young women experiencing cancer. By sharing her story and experiences, she hopes to inspire others to overcome their own challenges and create positive change in their communities. Our guest today is Miriam Fearon. Miriam, thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
Really, really appreciate your time. So I think we've got an amazing amount of content to cover today and lots of really, really important topics. But I just want to pass the floor over to you and just in your own words, tell us all about your story.
Thank you so much. We'll save the life story for a different time, but I'll start kind of around diagnosis, which happened when I was 26 years old. So I was in the shower and actually had a bottle of shower gel, which was from Copperfield. So huge shout out to them.
Absolutely.
It's a shower gel called Squeeze of Melons, and it's amazing. It smelled like melon. And just in the shower and realized that there was like a lump, like a teeny tiny, like a bump in my right breast, and just immediately thought that doesn't feel normal. It's not how my body should feel. And the next morning I called my GP and just asked for an appointment. It was during COVID, but I was really, really worried, and they kind of understood quite quickly that I was really concerned and that, I was taking all of the right precautions. I wasn't, I wasn't putting anybody at risk intentionally by kind of needing that appointment, but I definitely needed to be seen. I was able to see my GP. I believe it was like a day or two later. It was very, very quick turnaround. And she's absolutely amazing. She understood right away why I was worried, and she did all of the right things in terms of reassuring me that when you're young, statistically, there's hundreds of other things that it's more likely to be than anything nefarious. And that actually she could see that I was worried, and she said that actually, on balance, she was maybe concerned too, and she just wanted to make sure that we were doing all of the right things by getting me in to be screened and scanned. I live in Nottingham, which has an amazing research and care facility called the Breast Institute. So literally in a number of kind of days, I was being scanned. I was at the Breast Institute and being reassured again by another nurse this time, who was telling me all about how young women often have hormonal changes to our bodies, often have cysts, often have lumps and bumps, which can be very easily medically explained, and kind of reassuring me. And I remember she said to me, I was really nervous. I don't like needles or anything like that. And I was really scared and shaky because I'd had some blood taken. And she was like, the one thing that you don't need to worry about is cancer. And, statistically, she's correct. But it's just unfortunate that that's kind of, it got my mind thinking. And then as I went from kind of blood tests into physical scans, I had an ultrasound. And on the ultrasound, the consultant saw something, and her demeanor, her body language, her face just dropped. And I was kind of mentally like, I was on my own because of COVID, and I just knew in that moment that it was really bad news. And she was really polite and kind of professional, and she was like, "I'm just going to have a colleague come and have a look at the screen." This is, and she brought in another consultant who also looked at the screen, and I was just like, "Okay, it's bad news." So on that day, I then went on to have a biopsy. Actually, having my biopsy was how I learned what a biopsy was. I do not recommend that as an introduction to the process. It was really quite horrible all around. It didn't go exactly to plan. And yeah, it was like a literal baptism by fire into what kind of investigative healthcare processes look like. Fast forward to a week and a half later, and I was just in my day job working, and I had a call from the hospital, who were quite blunt and quite brief, and over the space of a 6-minute phone conversation, told me that I had cancer and that I would need to kind of mentally prepare because I would need to do treatment very, very quickly, and that there would be a lot of information coming very, very thick and fast. And I don't really remember much else from that conversation. I just remember, like, I think we all have a moment in our lives when everything just stops and there's no thoughts and it's just this horrible feeling. And for me, that was very much that moment. I was like entirely on my own during COVID, like in a work day, like hadn't mentally prepared, hadn't sat down or any of those things.
Yeah.
And actually my boyfriend at the time, now husband, is a soldier. He's in the military. He's in active duty, and he was on a deployment at the time. So felt like being hit with a ton of bricks. And I remember just being like, I got a notification on my phone because my next meeting was going to be starting in a couple of minutes. And it was just like one of those things. I was just like, okay. I called my manager and was just like, "Hey, I'm not going to be in this afternoon. Need to take some time. I'll talk to you tomorrow." And then I called my mother and just completely broke down, just like, "Oh my God, how am I going to do this?" And then I think from there, everything just, and I think it's probably a familiar story for a lot of especially younger patients, everything gathers momentum. Like once you realize what's going on, you realize like you get your kind of classifications and categorizations, you get more scans, and then there's a process and like a machine that for me was very, very quick. And I'm eternally grateful for that. And I think from the other side, my husband's job were actually incredibly supportive. And at the time, even though he was I don't want to say just a boyfriend, but just my boyfriend, that within 48 hours, he was home and he was able to look after me and he was able to kind of be there, which I truly don't think I would have done any of this without, because I think we all need support and we all need that person in our corner, especially when lockdown's a thing and you're literally not allowed to have a lot of people around you at all. So yeah, that was kind of my route to diagnosis.
Absolutely. Well, what a journey to go through as well, and in such a difficult circumstance of being COVID. I cannot imagine just picking up the phone. Like you said, you went from being constantly reassured it's probably not cancer, to, you know, you're smart enough to sit there on the ultrasound and realize when something's wrong, and you've got that, and then to just have a phone call 2 minutes before a meeting, when you're not able to be around anyone, not able to have that support, not being able to lean on any shoulders. That virtual setting's really, really isolating. Just obviously very grateful that your now husband was able to come back and be there. Did you have what part of lockdown were we in? Was it full lockdown, no social bubbles? I can't, the timelines.
It was 2021. It was February 2021. So there were, from what I can remember, I think you could go like buy a coffee, but you couldn't like have friends over. I can't exactly remember the details because a lot of my attention was elsewhere, I'll be honest with you. But yeah, it was definitely like a very isolating experience. Just the fact that, I'm somebody that I would always have like somebody with me for like a blood test or something like that, and not being able to do that because obviously rightly we want to keep people safe, but it just wasn't possible. So yeah.
And not having that human interaction when that news is broken as well. I know that news is difficult enough in any setting, but over the phone just feels so cutthroat. It's not the right word. Again, it was done for the right reasons, but it's, yeah.
Very cold, and very, very detached. And I think it's, yeah, you're exactly right. It we are very kind of social creatures as humans, and it was a very kind of, it felt very inhumane. Um, so yeah, then I moved into kind of treatment options and learning about what cancer was, what breast cancer was, what triple negative cancer was. And throughout this time, this small lump that I had found a couple of weeks prior was just growing and growing. And I could feel it growing. I could see it growing. And in between kind of the initial kind of noticing it all the way through to when I embarked on kind of treatment, even though there were less than 2 months between those kind of dates, the cancer had gone from being kind of like less than a centimeter to 5.5 centimeters. And that's like a really big difference. Yeah. And I'm not like the largest of people. And so to have that kind of growth, I think is really, for those of you who've kind of been through it and people who kind of understand, it's that in itself has an immense impact on your mental health and your kind of your understanding of what you're fighting. So
that's a very visceral, real reminder, isn't it, as it's sitting there?
Absolutely. So then I started with fertility treatments. My husband and I were, we wanted to have a family, but when you're 26, I know that for a lot of people, maybe they've already started that journey. For me, I was kind of like, I'm still a kid. And that's for one day, hopefully far in the future. But I definitely knew that I wanted to do that. So we went through, I did egg freezing. At the time, that was the only option available to me. Right at the end of the process, I remember one of the nurses saying, it's so interesting that you chose to freeze eggs when you should have frozen embryos. And I was kind of like, what do you mean? Like, why should I have frozen embryos? And she's like, because they're so much more effective. And I was like, oh, okay. Well, thank you for telling me. I had no idea. And throughout the kind of conversation, it became very apparent that from speaking with the consultant had made a comment around when I meet the right person. And that was why I hadn't been offered the option that for me would have been the right choice, which would have been to freeze embryos, because, at the time I was living with my boyfriend, we had plans to get married. That happened later on. And it was like the second time in like a couple of months that again, like everything just went quiet and cold, and the universe stopped for a moment for me. And I think it was just a really devastating realization that somebody could make a decision on your behalf that can so kind of hugely impact your future and your life. And yeah, it was really kind of a very disenfranchising moment to realize that not only you so vulnerable, I couldn't go back and do the fertility kind of injections and all of those things again, because like you said, it's this visceral kind of thing that you can see happening to your body as the cancer is growing. I just didn't have the time. So literally 2 weeks after the egg retrieval surgery, I was back at back at a different hospital, but back in hospital to start chemotherapy. So yeah, very, very quick, and kind of not a lot of downtime for my body. I was kind of really not in a good way, kind of hadn't recovered fully, but just didn't have, again, the luxury of being able to recover properly to start.
And when you're in that baptism of fire, as you said, everything is moving so quickly, and you don't have a good headspace to make decisions. But what you do, I would imagine, want is all the information. And if some of that information is not given to you, you want to be empowered in your choices to make those choices about your life, your body, and when they're removed from you, what sounds like an incredibly throwaway comment, which is just someone making a judgment on your life, right? When you meet the right person, just basically saying, you're not married, so I've made this choice for you, is what I've taken from that.
Absolutely. It's what I took from it too.
Which is, yeah, the opposite of what it should be. It should be individualized, personalized care where you are empowered to make those decisions that you said have a lifetime of effect down the line. So
Absolutely. And I think you're exactly right. It's that judgment that is really not that person's to make. There are plenty of people who have successful pregnancies and successful parenthood journeys who aren't married or who decided to do it on their own or are, not in a couple anymore, but very successful at that kind of parenting journey. And I think to just decide that at 26 I hadn't chosen the right person, I think it's beyond insulting, actually. I think it's really inappropriate, and it's not that person's place to decide. Even if I had actually made a terrible decision, there are plenty of, again, like, there are plenty of people who maybe if they could go back wouldn't choose that person again, who, is that person to help them become a parent. But yeah, I think it was just very, very disenfranchising and made me feel even more powerless. And I think, when you have all of these processes and you have all of this kind of necessity to act so fast, there's not a lot of decision-making power anyway, because ultimately you need to do what you need to do to survive. But then to realize that there were options after the fact is really painful.
Yeah. And we are ingrained, and, I think this has its upsides, trust your medical team. That is right. But we should also be empowered to have the information and be empowered to have the space to ask the right questions, especially at that time where, well, in your circumstance, especially going through COVID, you may not have your people around you to ask those questions. You're at these appointments on your own, or they're over the phone and they're happening very quickly. That is something that needs to be taken into account, because at the end of the day, your life is the life that is being affected.
Absolutely.
So yeah, sorry, please carry on.
Of course, thank you. So yeah, that was kind of I think that was probably the first time in my life when I realized that doctors could be wrong. Which I think, like you said, we live in a society, and rightly so, where we trust people in authority and we trust people who have these accreditations and this experience to advise us in the right way. So that was really disappointing and disheartening, but I'm almost grateful that then I was able to learn that I maybe did need to be critical sometimes of the thinking of professionals around me, because even if their intentions are good, it doesn't necessarily mean that their judgments are correct. And I think that personal judgment is entirely different to their medical opinion, which is then entirely different sometimes to the best route for me as a patient, or for any listeners as patients, or people who are kind of supporting a patient. So that brought me into chemotherapy, and chemotherapy is a journey. It's probably the hardest thing I've ever had to do. And I knew going in that it was going to be tough. And I think that's one good thing about kind of modern medicine and kind of education around healthcare, is that we understand that chemotherapy is really, really tough. It's really hard on the patient. It's really hard on people around them. And so I'd mentally prepared that it was going to be really difficult, and it was probably going to be very, very painful, and all of these things. So starting my first chemotherapy, I had that context. But the context that I didn't have was that just because somebody's delivering care, it doesn't mean that they're actually the right person to be delivering care for you. And by that, I mean that during my first chemotherapy infusion, they were struggling to find one of my veins. It happened a lot. I had a lot of bruising from a lot of blood tests in very quick succession over the prior days and weeks. And so essentially, like, a lot of my veins had collapsed because of the trauma of like that experience. And so the nurse was really struggling to find a vein, and she was causing like a lot of bruising and a lot of discomfort. And I was saying, you know, this is hurting me. I don't think it's working. And she said, oh, no, it's fine because you don't have skin like her, so she'll feel pain a lot, but your skin's darker and thicker, so you won't feel pain. And she pointed at a lady who was in the next bed over. She was quite far away because COVID, but she was in the next bed over, and she was a white lady. And she said, you won't feel pain as much as her because you have dark skin and dark skin's thicker. And I just remember just like my heart just like fell out of my chest. Like I don't think I responded. And I was so shocked and I was so afraid. And just realizing that the person who's there with a needle, like literally putting it into my body and hurting me, is telling me that I can't feel pain, even though I'm telling her I am feeling pain and it's really hurting me. It was so scary because not only is like hospital scary, like, you know, chemotherapy and cancer is scary, but I then hadn't ever realized that I would be in danger from a healthcare provider. Like, as much as my previous experience with the consultant made me question his judgment, I didn't feel physically unsafe. I felt very cared for in that environment, maybe misguided, but very cared for. And it was a really like scary realization that I think for a lot of us, even people of color, racism is this abstract kind of evil entity that we all understand is wrong and we all understand is bad, but we don't necessarily experience, or luckily a lot of us don't experience on a daily basis, the reality of that. And when we do, it's a racist comment, or it's a passing experience. It's not something that you have to kind of sit with and live with. And to realize that the person who's responsible for keeping you alive doesn't think you can feel pain, it's really horrifying for just every possible reason. But then especially, again, when you're on your own, you don't have somebody who is there to be like, no, that's not okay. You can't say things like that. You can't do things like that. And also that's entirely incorrect and implausible and not backed by science and not best practice. So there's like so many layers to that kind of misinformation, the damage and the distress that can cause.
Yeah, and I say this from my position as a white man. I genuinely cannot comprehend, although I can empathize with, how compounding the fear must be when those layers are added on top of what is a harrowing and traumatic experience anyway. You are in hospital to be looked after. That's the antithesis of that when you're told, when you are vocalizing, communicating, and someone just is not hearing that. And it's not even just not hearing that, sorry, that's not what happened, is saying the exact opposite on your behalf. Yeah, I can't understand that. That is such a horrible thing to go through. Must feel so vulnerable in those moments. And sorry, no, carry on.
No, just say absolutely. I think you're exactly right. It's just such a painful realization.
And is that something that continued through your care, or was that something that you've experienced throughout your whole cancer journey, or is it these moments that stand out during it?
I think that's a great question. And actually, luckily, that was the only time where I had that kind of direct experience during my treatment journey with racism. And I think it really reshaped the way that I saw healthcare. It really reshaped the way that I see the world, actually. Because I think naively I had up until that moment had this idea of people being in healthcare because they care about people and they want to look after people. And I'm not necessarily saying that this woman didn't want to provide care, but I feel like as a medical professional, the duty of care should trump any kind of perception or harmful beliefs that are upheld by racism. And I feel very much that in that moment that didn't happen. I think it made me really wary, and it made me, to your point, like a lot more afraid. I felt a lot more vulnerable, at a time when, I started to lose my hair, my teeth started to crack, like I stopped being able to walk. Chemotherapy is brutal to your body, and I say that as somebody who, you know, is very, very active. Up until I started my treatments, I was climbing mountains and I was riding horses and I was doing yoga and running, and just almost overnight to be physically incapacitated and to then also have this additional fear that not only have I never been so physically vulnerable in my life, but also realizing that the color of my skin can put me at this like increased level of danger was really it was really, really tough.
Yeah, and I
But then
think. Oh, sorry. I was just going to say, and I think I don't want to put words in your mouth at all, but I think that's one thing that charities can learn from. I hope people listening can learn from, and certainly the medical professionals listening can learn from. Is that it would be easy to go, oh, it's just one thing, right? It's easy. It's just one thing in it, but it underpins your feeling of care forever now. And that's the effect of that one interaction. It's not a one-off. It's not just one person saying one thing. It's one person saying one thing that then underpins how you feel about every medical interaction moving forwards, which is something that affects the rest of your life. And that is, incredibly damaging.
And I think that's such a brilliant call out to make, because I will share that whilst the other of my chemotherapy experiences were far more professional and, even to the point where during the last 3 rounds of my infusions, I ended up going into anaphylactic shock because I was allergic to the last 3 chemotherapy drug infusions that I had. Um, and I was so grateful that I didn't have the same nurse, because genuinely there was a part of me that thought, if she's here, I'm gonna die. And I don't say that lightly, I at all. And I think it's something that until you're in that situation, I don't think you'll ever understand. And I really hope that as few people as possible can experience that, because we really shouldn't have to. But I also think that there are so many women, and through my work with Black Women Rising and through the advocacy work with breast cancer now, this is not an uncommon story. In fact, the absolute inverse, which I think is sometimes really shocking and confronting for healthcare professionals in particular to hear and to understand. And then I think also within the nonprofit space, in particular in cancer, the work is so necessary and the funding is so necessary that oftentimes there will be people who have these opinions, who have positions of power, and that goes unchecked because the work is so necessary. And so I will say that, before I go back to praising like the amazing woman who brought me back each time that I went into shock, I will say that I have had experiences outside of my cancer journey and outside of the treatment journey with nonprofits where people have. I remember a lady at a cancer symposium telling me that she would not be able to relate to my lived experience as a cancer patient because she actually has a high-paying job and she had a good education and she was now married to a lovely husband. And I remember being really confused and being like, well, so do I. I have like a brilliant career. I have many accolades. I also had a wonderful education and I'm married to an incredible man. And I was so confused until she used the word urban. And then the penny dropped.
Wow.
That actually this lady had projected all of these assumptions of my level of education, my earning potential, my marriage prospects, into this assumption of I have no idea what she had imagined urban to look or sound like, but I think she looked at me and decided that I was probably as close to that as she'd find in the symposium, and then decided to just project all of these opinions onto me, which are so, so harmful because this is somebody who works for a very prestigious charitable organization, somebody who advises patients. And for her to decide that just because of the way that I look, whether it's because I'm young, whether it's because I'm a woman of color, I think we all understand the social implications of the word urban, to then just decide that somebody is uneducated. I have no idea why earning potential or your marriage prospects should even factor into a conversation about healthcare or being understood. But I think that it's a really important call out, because sometimes, because of the vital nature of the work, the prejudices and the judgments and the really harmful behaviors are almost brushed under the carpet because we understand that we need funding or we need research. And so I think for healthcare providers and for non-profit organizations or charities or NGOs in the space, I think it's so important that we are most critical to those closest to us, because the patients, I didn't have the energy. I didn't have the energy to stand up, let alone to call out institutional racism. And I think when you do, when we're on the other side, we have this enormous duty of care, because we're the people who do have the energy, who do have the stamina, who do have the background and the credibility as peers to call out this behavior in a way that it's so difficult when you're on the other side of the power dynamic. And whether that's because of your illness, whether that's because of access to the conversation in the first place. So when we are around these tables and when we are in these conversations, I think it's painful, and it's never easy to turn to the person next to you or close to you and say that behavior was concerning or problematic. But I think it is so important and so often overlooked, because there's almost a perception that there's maybe few bad apples, there may be a rogue person, but actually that one person can shape the way that entire communities experience and feel, and it's so important.
Could not agree more. And I think it's incumbent from charities and organisations, and definitely on the medical professional side, the shift of power seems like such an easy thing to say, because it's an easy concept of just, excuse my language, shut the fuck up and listen. I don't understand this. And, you know, we are a charity, a small charity, and we work very hard in just going, you know, what you, whoever the community is, you know, audience we are talking to, what do you need? We're a charity, we're a medical professional, we provide a service. What do you need? Talk to us. We're not here to project our thoughts, our feelings. It's to provide a space, listen, and then provide the service, which seems really simple. And actually, I believe is quite simple if you don't have any ego and you don't have any prejudice involved in it. But yeah, I can't imagine how frustrating and difficult it is to try and shift the power the other way. And that's, you know, not just singing. There's an amazing amount of charities and organizations out there doing really, really good work, but we just need to give space, listen, and then take action, right? That's
Absolutely that. And I think it's such a good call out. That idea of the patients know, right? We have the experiences, you have the experiences, we understand what we need. And I think sometimes you're exactly right. There's ego, there's perception, and patients will tell you there are so many amazing organizations. And I do want to say, I don't want to slate charities, I don't want to slate medical professionals, but I think it's a really important conversation to have. And I think it's in the same way that your healthcare professionals can really dictate your perception, your experience. I think it's exactly the same in the charity space. And I think the organizations who do the best work, so whether it's Thrive Against Cancer, whether it's Black Women Rising, whether it's Breast Cancer Now, whether it's Trackstock or Girl versus Cancer, who are just organizations who I've personally been able to see close and personal the incredible things that they're doing. They do so well because they listen to the communities, they listen to the people that they're serving, and they give them the things that they need to survive or to thrive or to just take the next step, because sometimes that's the goal. Sometimes you don't have the vision. Like when you're in the midst of treatment, you don't know what's next. So you want to just have that next step, that next day, that one little milestone to get to first.
Yeah. And absolutely, that's what I think thriving is. It's no matter what's going on, what your diagnosis, prognosis, it's just taking that next bit, just to be doing that to the best of whatever it is for you, just carrying on. That's what we're here to help people do, right? That's the idea.
Absolutely. And
I was just going to say, we've talked a lot about some really, really important issues, but I don't want to forget you in all this. You've gone through so much. And we sort of left off anaphylaxis, which is really, really scary. How was that managed? And I obviously know the outcome because we're talking now, but how did that all progress, and what has life been like post-treatment, and long-term effects and all of that?
so I think anybody who's been in, I think, any kind of shock knows that it's an unpleasant experience. I think so anaphylactic shock is like an extreme allergic reaction. The way that kind of happened to me is that my throat closed up very, very quickly, and my face swelled up, and I just was like really hot. My hands didn't really work, and luckily the nurse who was closest to me could see that, and she was kind of like, "Are you okay?" And I was like, "I can't speak." And she was like, "Okay, let's." And she very, very quickly, like within seconds, there were new infusions going in. There was new drugs. There was what I now know was an enormous dose of antihistamines. The chemotherapy was taken away. All of those things. And it was really scary, but I remember going home and I remember like feeling the lump in my chest, and every time it would be smaller. And the first kind of few rounds of chemotherapy, I think it was around about 3 months, each time I was like feeling it get smaller. And so I knew that for the last 3, which were going to be tough, and I knew that the thing that was really propelling me was the fact that every day I could feel that lump getting smaller. I knew that the drugs were working, and I really, it's sometimes you need faith with these treatments, because you can't see it, you can't feel it, and you're going through hell. So I feel so grateful that I could see it working in real time, and so I just knew that if I just held on a bit longer, and if I just got through the next infusion, which each time they made the infusions really, really lengthy so that I could have like lower doses over a much longer period of time. I had higher and higher doses of steroids, and higher doses of the kind of antihistamine medication to kind of try and make it as bearable as possible. And actually for the last treatment, because it went on so late at night, and because there had only been me for probably the last 5 or 6 hours of the treatment, the nurses let my then fiance, because he had recently asked me to marry him, come and sit with me, and just that humanity, just being like, actually, you're on your own in this empty hospital with all of the lights off because it's the middle of the night. Like, maybe it's okay if we have somebody with you, because we're not going to be putting anybody in danger. It made the world of difference. And I will say those 2 nurses, they stayed so long beyond their shift's ending. And because of the ward being like a daytime ward, they didn't have night cover. So they stayed and just ate into their own lives and their own time. And they still made it special for me, because once the infusions had finished, and no doubt they wanted to just head right home, they were like, "So now you get to go ring the bell, because it's been such a journey." And they turned on all the lights, and they let me ring the bell, and they took lots of pictures, and they just made it a memorable experience for all of the right reasons. And it was just such a beautiful thing that they were able to be like, like I remember one of them being like, "Normally we'd give you some tea, but we don't have any." And it was just like such a sweet thing, because again, like, because my husband was there, or at the time fiance, he was able to like bring in like things, and it just made it so much more bearable because I felt like a person being treated like a human, as opposed to almost trying to demonstrate that I was a human. So I think I felt really seen and I felt really cared for, and I think it put me in a really good stead to then go into the scans that would decide what treatment happened next, because I felt comforted that if I had that team again, if I needed to do more chemotherapy, that would be okay, because they'd showed that not only can I survive like really tough things, but that if something bad happens, that they understand what to do to look after me, and they understand to be able to keep me alive. And so, as much as I was still very scared, I was so much less scared than I had been with the kind of previous experience. And I think then I had this kind of determination. I think as chemotherapy ended, I had met a couple of really inspiring people online. So one of them is the amazing Leanne Perro, who founded Black Women Rising. The other is an amazing lady called Lauren, whose surname I will absolutely butcher, so I'm not going to try. But she founded Girl vs. Cancer, and she was bringing together young women who had experienced cancer of all different kinds, who are going through their treatment journey. And as lockdown kind of started to ease up, they were filming a campaign that I became a part of. And it was like such a turning point in my journey of being able to, for the first time, give back to these women who, because I'd been in lockdown and in isolation and like doing treatments and not really socializing, it was being able to see these incredible people like in person was amazing. But then also to be able to give back to the wider community who'd been helping me with advice, and just like from things like bra recommendations when you're getting ready for surgery to like, can you use face cream when you're doing chemotherapy, and just everything in between, to be able to then be able to help. It was such an amazing feeling, and so empowering, because I had modeled from like being a teenager right up until I had been diagnosed. And I still my hair, I had no eyelashes. I had taken steroids because I needed to, and gained like 10 kilos, 11 kilos in like 3 weeks. So I was not feeling like my most beautiful self anymore. And so to be asked and to be around all of these women who all understood what I was going through because they'd gone through it before, and to be able to see them being like beautiful and empowered and older than me, which meant that they'd survived and like all of those things. It was such an incredible experience. And it really solidified in me that when I got healthier, that's what I wanted to do. And that's where I wanted to spend my time and energy, because I just realized that that's what they were doing for me. And I wanted to be that for other young women, and specifically other young women of color, and specifically other young Black women, because even in the most diverse campaigns, there's normally one or two of us, never anymore. Even in the kind of best, most representative images and collaborations, there's still so few of us. And I remember when I was looking for people like me, and that's when I found Leanne, it was really hard to find young Black women, and it was really hard to find young mixed race or biracial women. And when you Google statistics specifically for us, now I know that it's because there's not enough research. But at the time, the prognosis looked awful. Please never Google your symptoms. It's not great, especially because there are so many caveats that need to be made for that data to be
I think
legible.
we need a little like thing to come up on screen, like a little "do not Google your symptoms." Everyone says that. Disclaimer.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're onto something with that. But I wasn't sure that I would survive even if it was treatable, because I couldn't find like another multi-ethnic woman who looked like me, who was speaking about her experience, who wasn't either dealing with a kind of terminal diagnosis or had already passed. And so even though I felt this spirit in this community, I'm still not exactly the same as, for example, like an Asian lady in her 50s, and I'm still not exactly the same as like a white lady in her 40s. And so as much as they were giving me this hope, I was still kind of feeling like, maybe wouldn't it be nice to have another girl like me? Wouldn't it be nice if I could find that? So that was like a real galvanizing moment for me, that then as I went into surgery, I was like, this is what I'm gonna do when I get through this. Like, this is what I'm gonna do. Like, I don't even know if I'm gonna go back to work, but I'm gonna do this.
I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. I love that. From what you were talking about earlier about feeling so vulnerable and so disenfranchised, to then finding just that moment and those amazing organizations and people that you've already shouted out, that you could find that community, and being in lockdown, then being around people, it just sounds like this really solidifying, beautiful moment that just has driven your purpose moving forward. So that I don't think we can underestimate the power in organizations and advocates doing things, because this is the real impact of it. The branches keep growing, and I love that.
I love that analogy. You're exactly right. It's like roots of a tree. It's like finding whatever it is that's grounding you in it. Because I think as much as there is, life and death, and it's heavy, and it is, and it should be, sometimes you also just need other women who you can laugh and cry with, or other men, or other people on the journey who understand it. And yes, you can cry together, but my God, you can laugh too. Like, you can have these, exactly to your point, you can have these moments of like spreading your branches. You can grow together. And I think that's what, whether it's Thrive Against Cancer, whether it's places like Future Dreams, there's such an incredible essential part of cancer care and kind of aftercare, which is the community side. It's having people who understand you. And I think outside of the cancer space, we all understand why it's important to have friends and people who like the same hobbies as we like. And it's no different in healthcare. And especially when something is as big and takes up so much of your time, it's just the most important and beautiful and sometimes devastating thing. But to have your community around you, regardless of what happens, and regardless of, the journey and how tough it is, and the fact that actually some amazing people that we meet are not going to be with us at the end, having that space is so important. And regardless of whether we have one more day or a month or 10 years, having these people around us is such an important thing, because it keeps us who we are.
100%. And that, for me, is why representation is so important, because you need to be around people that get it and people that get your specific experiences as well. Sorry, I feel like we're shooting through and there's so much that we could talk about. I just wanted to ask, have you got any advice for people going through something similar about how they can advocate for themselves and how they can question what's happening to them and around them?
I think it's a really good question. I think for me, I didn't have the energy to advocate for myself. I didn't have the wherewithal, and I wasn't able to have somebody else in the room to do it for me. I think for people who are going through that experience, the first thing that I want to say is, if you don't have the energy, that's okay. There will be time, and your health and your getting through today is the most important thing. If you do feel unsafe, or you do feel like you want a second opinion, or you do feel like you want a different opinion, trust your instinct that that's what you want to do. And I would say rely on a service that will be able to support and empower that for you, whether they do it for you or whether they support you in that. I think that there is so much weight that can be added to your journey as a patient by having this kind of responsibility, in addition to your appointments and your treatments and the process, to have this additional level of then criticizing, critiquing, or questioning. There are incredible advocacy services. So I mentioned Breast Cancer Now. I know that Macmillan also. There are so many services where you can either speak with a medical professional and just say, I'm feeling a bit strange today and I'm not sure why, all the way through to saying, I think I've had a question about my diagnosis or a problem, or I need a second opinion, and they'll be able to signpost you. They'll have resources that are specific to your kind of cancer, to your maybe your age demographic, or you might have other conditions that I would never be able to advise on, but they'll be able to help you and kind of point you in that right direction. But I think just as we were talking about the importance of community and kind of supporting people in that kind of emotional way, don't ever underestimate the resources that these organizations can support you with when it comes to the kind of more care-based and kind of almost professional lens that sometimes we need to treat advocacy with. Because ultimately, patient advocacy is a job, and it's a job that I take really, really seriously. But I also know that when I was doing my journey myself, I didn't have the energy to do that. So never feel like you're not doing enough. And I know that a lot of women, especially when I'm having these conversations, will share that they feel like they should have done more or they should have done something else. And absolutely trust yourself. If you think you need to do something, please do it and feel empowered to. But never kind of feel like you're not doing enough, because it's so many jobs.
Yeah. And I think my shout out at this point is for organizations and professional bodies, when people do have the time and space to be able to reflect on their journeys and what went right, what went wrong, and how we can improve, we need to provide that space and just listen and learn so that we can improve services the whole way throughout that journey, from the very beginning all the way through to long term, and work together. I think that's the big one for organizations, because we don't need to. There are amazing organizations doing things out there that we can all just signpost to. So I feel, as I think I say this every episode, I could chat all day and there is so much more to say, but I'm so grateful for your time. But what we do with every one of our guests is ask 5 quick fire questions. If you're okay, we can go through those. I'll just quick fire shoot them over. So what advice would you give to someone who's worried they might have cancer?
Trust your gut, go to your doctor.
Quick fire answer. Look at that. That was one and done. What's the most impactful thing someone did for you after your diagnosis?
That's a really good question. So actually, shout out to my little sister Leah, who I was really scared about chemotherapy, and I was reading a lot of guides. There are amazing guides on what to take to chemotherapy, and depending on the kind of chemotherapy, you might need to take different things, especially if it will take a long time. And I got a little parcel of like a bunch of different teas, which it was just the sweetest thing. And a few of my friends, the Spice Girls, who will probably be listening to this, it's our group chat name.
Love it.
They also did something quite similar where they put together like little teas, like a little cup, like things like that. And it was just those kind of things that you can remind you that you have people behind you, especially if you're alone or especially if your treatments take a really long time. Just so sweet and just so kind of humanizing, just normalizing, just like reminding us all that we're just girls at the end of the day. Some of us aren't, but I am. Was really, really just cute. And then I think something that I think about a lot actually is the online communities. So especially during COVID, but actually outside as well, just the power of being able to say, does anybody know about this treatment? And the first time I asked a question about surgery, I got maybe 60 responses from women who are at all different stages of their community, who I just found on Instagram. And I was blown away with the thought, the care and the attention, the detail, the level of knowledge that people were just so freely sharing, even though they were going through their own very traumatic experience. So So I think those two, but it's having people supporting you. It's the most powerful.
Like you said earlier, we're just humans navigating, and that connectivity is so, so important. Absolutely love that. I think we might have covered this one already, but if you want to add anything, please do. But what's the worst thing someone said to you about having cancer?
Yeah, I think we have. I think it's absolutely that I wouldn't feel pain. Just it's something that even now, even after therapy and even kind of coming through the journey successfully and kind of being like, at this point, 3 years, no evidence of disease, it still keeps me up at night sometimes.
Yeah. And I'm sure it keeps a lot of other people up as well. It's, a harrowing thing to go through. What advice would you give to someone recently diagnosed with cancer?
Give yourself space and grace. I think the mental load of knowing what you have to go through or that you will need to go through in the near future is enormous. And I think sometimes speaking with other patients who are recently diagnosed, they feel pressure to get things done, get their ducks in a row, get their house in order, finish a contract at work. I was definitely one of those people. There is no point. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if your playroom is messy. It doesn't matter if you don't have your roots touched up. It doesn't matter if you have an inbox full of work emails or actually personal emails or texts. As long as you're centering yourself in all of this, I think, again, as a woman, as women, we're often expected to carry a lot of additional load, whether it's children, whether it's emotional labor, whether it's domestic labor. And I think that the best piece of advice I can give is that now is not the time to give. Actually, when you're diagnosed, it's your time to take. It's your time to rely on whether it's your partner, whether it's your friends, whether it's your siblings, your job, anything that can support you, use it, take it, because some of us only get one shot at this treatment journey. Some of us don't. There's not an if it works. It has to work. And so never, ever, ever put yourself in a situation where you're not giving everything to surviving and to getting through. Because ultimately, if you have children, if you have friends, if you have a partner, you want to be around for them. You don't want to give today so that you're exhausted and ready for the journey. You want to give everything to yourself so that at the end you're going to be who you need to be for yourself, but for all of those people as well.
Love that. That is just a perfect answer. If there's ever a time to be selfish, that is the time to be selfish, and it's totally, totally okay. Lastly, what's the biggest lesson you've learned from having cancer?
I love that question. I think sometimes people expect you to be like, oh, I found spirituality in crystals and now I'm really zen, which absolutely, if it works for you, I love that for you. And we all love a good crystal. For me, it taught me to not tolerate being mistreated. I think it actually took away a lot of my patience, which I think sounds really silly, but I feel like I suffer fools less gladly. I feel like I became a much stronger person. I think professionally through the advocacy that has had an incredible effect, not only on my development as an advocate, but actually as a public speaker, as a voice, as somebody who is unafraid to speak. I think, the journey was transformational. And I think I thought that I would come out more patient and more kind of tolerant and more kind of calm. And I think actually I just realized that life is so short, even if we're blessed to live to 100, that actually if somebody or something is being mistreated, we have to talk about it, we have to acknowledge it, and we have to make it better. So I think just that ability to really prioritize what's important and to have that North Star of, I think you mentioned earlier, I really know my purpose and I know what I'm here to do. And that's to make sure that other people don't have to go through what I did. And I think having that is such a gift, because I know that there are people who are twice or 3 times my age who still don't really know their purpose. For that, I'm very grateful.
I think that is a perfect place to surmise the podcast. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for sharing everything you've been through. Thank you for sharing your purpose, sharing your story. Please keep sharing your voice, and I know you absolutely will. Thank you for all the shout outs, your amazing husband, the Spice Girls, lots of brilliant organizations out there that we will list on the website and in the comments and everything. So just, please keep doing everything you're doing, and really appreciate all your time today. It's been a pleasure. Thank you for listening, and thank you to our amazing supporters and funders who make this podcast happen. If you enjoyed this episode, please give us a review and follow us on social media at Thrive Against Cancer. And be sure to check out our other episodes wherever you listen to your podcasts and on YouTube. If you want to help support our mission to give a voice to the cancer community, please contact us or visit our website to learn more at thriveagainstcancer.co.uk.